So this video, okay, this is my testimony of basically the last 2.5, 3 months. So I'm actually sitting on the same bench in Aurora, Denver, Colorado. This exact bench is the bench I sat at a few months ago, 3 or 4 months ago. You know, just sitting here, still in a meth-induced psychosis. I had actually spent probably close to 5 years just in a meth-induced psychosis. Whether I was actively using it or not, I was in a meth-induced psychosis. You know, I sat right here. I'm really wondering how I was ever going to stop, because it's a true statement in the fact that for reasons yet obscure, the alcoholic and addict loses the power of choice in use or drink, you know, and that happens, you know, and that tragic situation arrives long before the person doing it really fully concedes to that. You know, and that you know, a lot of people don't believe that. You know, a lot of people haven't walked in my shoes or anybody else I know's shoes. They're never gonna believe that. They think, a lot of people probably thought for years I actually wanted to do what I was doing, but I didn't. I was latched. You know, I simply didn't know any other way. I mean, no matter how painful and miserable my life got, I just kept doing it because I didn't know any other way. You know, I didn't. So as I walk around here, you know, even as being sober, okay, I was coming off the shit, and I was still walking around the streets plotting nonsense, okay, waving my arms around, just saying the most incoherent shit, sober, you know, still. And I was that far gone. I actually and I'm gonna talk about the problem, but you'll see as I will build this up into a pure solution. I actually forgot my own name from the game. Basically, I actually forgot my own name from using methamphetamine. I really did. I mean, I was mentally that gone that I had forgotten my own name. I didn't. So I mean, so when I was living on the streets of Garden City, Greeley, okay, I was behind this pillar. You know, it's about 3 in the afternoon. I was about having freaking heat stroke. Actually, I was about having heat stroke. Okay, I go rolling a bowl, and I looked up in the sky and I said, God, send me a miracle, because at that point in time, I didn't even know my own name. I didn't know I had family. I didn't know anything about anything. I barely even knew how to fucking roll a bowl. I really did. I was that gone that I forgot how to do something that I had been doing for most of my life up to that point. So that very night, it's about 10:30, 11 p.m. I'm just wandering around, you know, looking for a place to do some really unlawful shit. And I'm not gonna say what that was, you know, I'm not. I'm just gonna say my hormones and that drug made me very, very much indeed, miraculously horny, you know. And so I you know, I did a lot of stuff, but so I sat down at a bench, and I was whipping out my pint of KD, you know, and this was really just the bottom of all bottoms, you know. I really didn't know my own name, you know. So before about a week before that, I was out of sober living. Okay, and I left there obviously to get high and live on the streets because I didn't know any other way but that. And to live in psychosis because, as I said, the hallucinations, all that shit You know, I mean, that was much more painful than living on the streets. I mean, that's why I got off the streets as quick as I did, because I went on the streets to use that drug, but I couldn't freaking deal with the drug anymore. I got fucking done, you know? So Joel is his name. He rolls up, okay? And I couldn't stand that guy. Nobody could, but that's beside the point. So he rolls up that night after I said, God, please send me a miracle. And what that did when he rolled up, and he said, Trent, yo, Trent. And I was like, who the fuck is Trent? Excuse my language. I was like, who's that? You know, who is that guy? And then what it did was it reminded me of who I was. It also reminded me that I had family and loved ones that cared about me. You know, and just that was a spiritual experience right there. You know, even though I was on the fucking shit, heavy on the blues, the every fucking thing, drinking all fucking free combined on the streets, really, you know, but on probation too. You know, but that just shows you, you know, that God was always with me the whole time. Okay, and even in those darkest times in my life, I would randomly have this insane amount of peace. No matter how high I was, it wasn't the drugs, it was the gleam of Jesus Christ in my heart, because he was saving me before I even knew I was being saved. You know what I mean? So that's a little bit of a story right there. You know, so I sobered up. I went to do a rehab. You know, and rehab didn't save my freaking life. Okay, not at all. I mean, it's just most of the time from the time I was 18 to 29, whatever, I'll just go to rehab just to get some food in my belly, get in better shape, and get out and fucking get just wrecked. You know what I mean? And so I was beyond any freaking rehab, any human's aid, any of that. You know, so, but anytime I say the word God, that is solution. So it's as I said, that night, God's miracle, right? So, but yeah, as I said, I mean, that peace that God would send me without me even asking for it was so strong that I was on the streets with nothing at all, cold weather, no drugs, fucking whatever the fuck, I was boosting, whatever. I had an insane amount of peace. I was happy, smiling sometimes, you know, and that's just Jesus' peace right there. No matter what you've done, no matter who you are, you know, Jesus will accept you. You just have to accept him. And it took me a long time to do that. But I mean, I truly am, and I can talk about my stories, you know, I can talk about it, but if you really were me or you witnessed it, you wouldn't really know how much of a walking miracle I am, that Jesus saved my life. And I'm about to explain exactly how that happened. Okay, it was about 2 months ago. And at that time, I was actually, I mean, it says it in the big book, if you fail to enlarge your spiritual life, and that's the real reason I kept going back out. You know, I know that because I'm doing it every day. I've lost the obsession to use meth. I walk around here, there's people fucking doing it down here all the fucking time. I don't give a shit. You know, I got the armor of God on me. You know, I don't care. You know, it's sad, it breaks my heart. You know, but there's nothing I can, you know, I write a book, you know, maybe it will save lives someday, because that's what God told me. So, I was riding home from work in the van. We take work vans to work. And I was wholeheartedly, I was going to go back out. I was like, fuck it, I'm going to go live on the streets here. I'm going to go back into the drug game. I'm going to start selling drugs, boosting shit. You know, I'm going to start getting psychotic and walking around, because that's all I freaking knew. The power of choice was gone, even when I wasn't doing it. So it was in that van, okay, that I was just sitting there with my headphones on, you know, and I just started praying my heart out, man. I just said, for like 10 minutes, you know, I don't really know what I said, but I kept saying, God, please show me mercy, please remove my obsession to use drugs. Just those two things, you know, just begging God, begging him, and that's all he ever really wanted me to do, okay? So by the time I had gotten home, the thoughts were removed. The obsession has been removed really since then. You know, I mean, maybe I've had some working thoughts, but they're quickly supplanted by praying for God to remove them. in a single breath. You know, and they're nothing to the way they were. I mean, I am free of that mental obsession. You know, I am. So I got home, and that obsession being removed, knowing that I didn't have to do that because I had no choice in it. I was so uncontrollably happy knowing I didn't have to use drugs. I was so freaking happy I didn't have to use, because I had to. I didn't have a choice. And God granted me that choice. Jesus did. He saved my life that fucking day. That day, in the fan, praying, surrender to Jesus, come back home, obsession's been removed. It's been about 2.5, 3 months since then. Okay? So, I was so uncontrollably happy, you know, and so, they say when you stop using meth, you're gonna have this anhedonia, whatever the hell, you won't get joy from nothing. Well, not when Jesus saves your life. When Jesus saves your life, He restores your mind and your happiness and all this stuff you didn't even know you had. But you have to have Jesus' help to become enlightened and know that you can be just as happy and peaceful as I am. You know, because that's what the world doesn't know. To know that you're loved and enough, you have to have Jesus' help. And that's exactly what happened. So I came home, obsession removed. Since then, you know, that happiness was so incredible that I haven't been miserable since then. I mean, I've enlarged that connection. I've enlarged my spiritual life every day. But after experiencing that level of happiness, you know, there was no going back. You know, I was like, no, I've been through so much freaking bullshit in my childhood to my drug addictions, because there was by the time I was 19 years old, okay, I was addicted to fentanyl, meth, alcohol, marijuana, pornography, sex, nicotine, all at the same time. Really. I never had enough money to get, but that's all the shit I was really dependent to at one time. You know, just to be free from that. And as I said, you know, the psychosis, I mean, that stuck around a little bit after I surrendered to God. But via spiritual experiences, okay, that what a spiritual experience does, okay, is it leads you to God, because you may have had some spiritual beliefs, but now, I may have had some, but I began to have a spiritual experience that led me to God, for God to come down in that spiritual experience and restore me to sanity after spending probably almost 5 years in a meth-induced psychosis. So I just shared with you how Jesus really did. He saved my life. And then He continued to, because I did have some lurking notions of using again. I mean, even like a week or two after. So I was going to do it, but what did I do? I went and I prayed to God to remove the thought and grant me peace and serenity in this breath. The prayer's done, the thought's gone, bro. You know what I mean? So what I'm really getting at is Jesus saved my life, you know. So then it was probably 2 weeks after I surrendered to God, He said, Trent, there's something you missed in Bill's story. Okay, and then I knew I accepted spiritual help, because surrendering to God was a spiritual experience in itself. I opened up the big book, read Bill's story, certain line in there, it said, raised from the dead. Okay, so I read that and I was like, holy shit, I've been raised from the dead. Spiritual experience, reading the book. Kept reading it. Okay. I've had so many spiritual experiences just reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. In that book, that is life. You know, the whole world could use that book. The whole world could live that book. You know, the promises in that book. We see spite in everything and everyone. You know, God will send us someone we can help if our own house is in order. And these are all very true things that are in that book, you know. Via accepting spiritual help through Jesus' help, you'll no longer regret the past, you know, nor wish to shut the door on it. You can use that experience. You can see how that experience can benefit others. We will know a new freedom. Comprehend the word serenity, okay? Because I never could comprehend the word serenity. One of my favorite paragraphs in the big book, the one that gave me the most intense spiritual awakening, is into action. Okay? We can be alone at ease and comfort. All fears falling from us. I don't know the whole thing. I almost got it though. I may have had some spiritual beliefs, but now I began to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the addiction problems have disappeared often comes strongly. I feel I'm in the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. And I am living that paragraph every single day. Because that book, not just God Saved My Life, that book, that was actually written by God because God spoke to Bill Wilson to write that book. And he speaks to me to write my book, Awakening Your Consciousness to a Power Greater Than Men. Because God does, You're good. I'm just recording a video. No, I'm just recording a video. You're good. I'll let you be. No, I see fire and everything, bro. That just bothered me a little bit, but I'm out here in Aurora. I'm about done with this video anyway. I apologize for that. But like as I was saying, you know, God does speak to me, and I enlarge that connection every day. I pray every day. I pray for other people. I love to get peace in their lives, and they get it. I can see it in their eyes. Anytime I'm around you and I love you, I'm probably praying for you to get peace, and you get it. Because that's my conscious contact. It's not a form of boasting. It's gratitude, not attitude. So as I truly said, Jesus saved my life by saving my life in the fan. And opening the book and guiding me to spiritual experiences, from reading the book that restored me to sanity, by those spiritual experiences sending me to Jesus to find true enlightenment, and then to be recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. And none of this really would be possible if it wasn't for my sponsor. And I won't say his name, you know, but when I was 20 years old, I was sitting outside an AA group. Okay, I was sitting there going through oxycodone withdrawal, and he sat down. He opened up the book and he said, your only alternatives are to live on a spiritual basis of life or go on to the bitter end. At that time, I had no idea what that really meant. You know, but it was that moment that even over a year later, I sat in that bridge house and I saw the book sitting there, and it was him that you know, I love you to all the planets and back, brother. I pass.